The storm arrived with a melancholic sigh, wrapping Silas's small attic apartment in a shroud of grey light and incessant drumming rain. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper, stale coffee, and a lingering frustration that felt as heavy as the low-hanging clouds. Silas, a writer whose dreams had long since outgrown the ambition of his current output, stared blankly at the flickering cursor on his laptop screen. For weeks, he had been stuck, a prisoner in the labyrinth of his own narrative, particularly the love story he was meant to be weaving. His protagonist, a woman of fierce independence and gentle spirit named Elara, felt more like a ghost than a character. Her essence elusive, her voice silent in his mind. He typed a line, then deleted it, the rhythmic backspace echoing his internal turmoil. She was a beacon in the twilight, he wrote, then scoffed. Too cliché, too hollow. How could he write about a love he hadn't truly felt, about a connection that seemed to exist only in the realm of fiction? His own heart felt like a carefully locked vault, guarding old pains and forgotten vulnerabilities, making it impossible to imbue his fictional lovers with genuine passion. He yearned for inspiration, for a spark to ignite the stagnant embers of his creativity, but all he found was an oppressive silence, broken only by the angry crescendo of the rain. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, starkly outlining stacks of books and discarded manuscripts, before plunging it back into a deeper gloom. The power flickered, making the laptop screen waver, and for a fleeting moment, Silas thought he saw something shift in the corner of his vision, a shimmer like heat haze, coalescing near his overflowing bookshelf. He rubbed his tired eyes, convinced it was just a trick of the exhausted mind, a hallucination born of sleep deprivation and artistic despair. He leaned back in his creaking chair, the storm outside mirroring the tempest within him. Elara, he whispered, the name a forgotten melody on his tongue. He pictured her in his mind, the way he had meticulously crafted her, a woman with eyes the colour of deep forest moss, hair like spun moonlight, and a spirit that refused to be quelled. He had designed her to be strong, kind, yet fiercely independent. A woman who could face any adversity with grace and a sharp wit. He wanted her to leap off the pages, to breathe life into his stagnant words, to teach him something about the love he struggled to portray. But she remained, steadfastly, a figment. Another, more intense flash of lightning ripped through the darkness, followed by an earth-shattering clap of thunder that made the old building shudder. This time, the shimmer was undeniable. It expanded, a shimmering distortion of light and air, like a ripple in reality itself. Silas gasped, his breath catching in his throat, as the amorphous glow began to take shape. It was ethereal, almost translucent, yet undeniably forming into a human silhouette. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the storm's fury. Fear, primal and cold, gripped him, but beneath it, a strange, electrifying curiosity. The light pulsed, growing brighter, casting long, dancing shadows across his cramped study. He squinted, his mind struggling to process the impossible sight unfolding before him. He saw outlines of flowing fabric, the delicate curve of a jawline, the soft sweep of hair, and then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light imploded inwards, leaving behind a stark stillness in its wake. Standing amidst the scattering motes of shimmering dust, bathed in the faint returning glow of the laptop screen, was a woman. Her clothes were simple, yet elegant, appearing to be made of fine linen, adorned with intricate, almost ancient-looking embroidery. Her eyes, indeed, were the colour of deep forest moss, wide with confusion and a hint of trepidation. Her hair, like spun moonlight, cascaded around her shoulders. She looked precisely, exquisitely, like the Alara he had been struggling to bring to life on his pages. Her presence was so vivid, so utterly real, that the air itself seemed to crackle around her. Silas's pen, forgotten in his hand, clattered to the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden, profound silence that had fallen upon the room, as if even the storm outside had paused to witness this impossible arrival. He stared, unable to form a single coherent thought, his mind reeling between disbelief and a terrifying, exhilarating recognition. The woman, his Alara, took a hesitant step forward, her gaze sweeping around the unfamiliar room, her brow furrowed in a delicate frown. Then her eyes met his, and a jolt, as powerful as the lightning that had preceded her, coursed through Silas. Where am I?" she asked, her voice soft yet clear, carrying a subtle echo of the wind chimes he had once imagined for her. "And who are you?" The question hung in the air, a fragile thread connecting two impossibly disparate realities, as Silas tried to reconcile the ink on his page with the living, breathing woman standing before him. Ilara's voice, a melody Silas had only ever heard in his mind, sent a shiver down his spine. He remained frozen, transfixed, his writer's brain attempting to categorize, to explain, to rationalize the utterly inexplicable. But there was no explanation, no logical framework for a character to step out of a manuscript and into his messy attic apartment. The scent of rain and old paper now mingled with a faint, unfamiliar aroma, something like wild blossoms and clean mountain air, an essence that seemed to emanate from her. She took another tentative step, her bare feet silent on the worn wooden floorboards, her moss-green eyes, filled with a disarming blend of curiosity and alarm, scanned the room, lingering on the overflowing bookshelves, the scattered papers, the very laptop where her story was currently stalled. "This place, it is unlike anything I have ever known," she murmured, her gaze returning to Silas, questioning yet devoid of outright fear. Her composure, even in such an impossible situation, was exactly as he had written her, a testament to her innate strength and unshakable core. Silas finally found his voice, though it emerged as a ragged whisper. "Ilara." He breathed her name, testing its reality, its weight. It felt heavier, more substantial now, her head tilted slightly. "That is my name. How do you know it?" A spark of suspicion flickered in her eyes, momentarily eclipsing the confusion. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. I wrote it." The words felt ridiculous, insane, even to him. How could he possibly articulate the truth, that she was a figment of his imagination, a creature of ink and longing, now made flesh? Ilara's brow furrowed, a delicate line appearing between her eyebrows. "Wrote it? What does that mean? Am I a story?" Her voice held a note of vulnerability that tore at Silas. He had created her to be strong, yes, but also deeply empathetic, capable of profound feeling. He pushed himself to his feet, the sudden movement causing his chair to scrape loudly across the floor, breaking the fragile silence. He walked towards her slowly, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "I don't know how this is happening," he confessed, his voice laced with genuine bewilderment. "I was just writing, and then you were here." He gestured vaguely at the spot where she had materialized. "The storm? The lightning?" She watched him, her gaze unwavering, assessing. He could feel her intelligent mind working, processing, trying to make sense of the chaos. He had written her to be smart, analytical, a storm, a lightning, she repeated thoughtfully. A bridge, perhaps, between worlds? Her suggestion, born of fiction, resonated with a strange truth. The practicality in her voice, despite the fantastical circumstances, momentarily steadied Silas. He was the one who was supposed to be grounded, yet he felt utterly adrift. Perhaps, he managed, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. Are you hungry? Thirsty? Do you feel anything? Ilara blinked, and a small, almost imperceptible tremor passed through her. I feel a great weariness and a strange emptiness. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach. A hunger, yes, and a profound thirst. This was real, the physiological needs, the human sensations. Silas, the cynical, reclusive writer, found himself suddenly propelled into the role of caregiver for a character from his own book. The absurdity was staggering, but her evident discomfort trumped his disbelief. Right, of course. Come. He led her to his minuscule kitchen, a space he rarely used beyond making coffee. He pulled out a carton of milk and some stale bread, the most substantial things he had. Ilara watched him with an intense curiosity as he poured milk into a chipped mug. Her eyes widened slightly as she took it, her fingers brushing his, a fleeting contact that sent another unexpected jolt through him. She drank slowly, deliberately, her eyes closing briefly as if savouring the simple liquid. "This is refreshing," she said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. A smile Silas had struggled for weeks to capture in prose. As she ate the bread, her gaze drifted around the apartment once more, now with less alarm and more thoughtful observation. "You live here?" she asked, a gentle judgment in her tone, but also an underlying empathy. "It is modest." Silas managed a wry smile. "It's all I have. A writer's life isn't always glamorous." He found himself relaxing slightly in her presence, the sheer impossible nature of it fading slightly in the face of her calm, almost comforting demeanour. He, who usually guarded his personal space with an invisible wall, found himself strangely at ease with this impossible guest. "But you create worlds," Ilara countered, her eyes sparkling with an innocent wonder that belied her sharp intellect. "That is a great power, is it not? To bring forth stories." Her words, so simple yet so profound, struck Silas with a fresh wave of awe and a confusing sense of responsibility. He had created her, now she was here, a living testament to his imagination. He had envisioned her as someone who would help others, even when facing her own difficulties. And now, in a strange inversion of roles, she was helping him, simply by existing, by affirming the very essence of his calling. The rain outside softened to a gentle patter, and a sliver of dawn light, pale and hesitant, began to pierce through the heavy clouds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air around them. It felt like a new beginning, an ink-stained dawn for a story that had just taken a spectacularly unexpected turn. The days that followed blurred into a surreal tapestry of impossible realities and comforting mundanity. Silas found himself in a constant state of mild disbelief, a feeling that paradoxically dulled the sharper edges of his initial shock. Ilara, true to his written character, adapted with remarkable speed. She devoured information, asking endless, insightful questions about everything from electric light to the concept of a publisher. She moved through his small apartment with an innate grace, her presence a quiet balm, her observations often piercingly accurate. One afternoon, Silas found her meticulously organising his chaotic bookshelf, her movements precise and thoughtful. Sunlight, warm and golden, streamed through the window, illuminating the fine dust motes swirling around her. "These," she said, pulling out one of his own published, though not particularly successful, novels, "are your stories. Do they hold worlds like the one I came from?" Silas paused, a mug of lukewarm coffee forgotten in his hand. They contain worlds I tried to create, but none of them ever felt as real as you do." He watched her, a knot forming in his chest. She was a living embodiment of his words, and yet There was so much more to her than what he had put on the page. He noticed the way her lips curved slightly when she concentrated, the subtle shifts in her moss-green eyes as she processed new information, the almost imperceptible hum she made when she was deep in thought. These were details he hadn't written, hadn't imagined. They were uniquely her. He began to observe her constantly, not as a writer observing a character, but as a man observing a woman. He saw his written traits come alive, her inherent kindness when she gently tended to his neglected houseplant, her quiet strength when she lifted a heavy box of old manuscripts without complaint, her independence when she insisted on learning how to operate his ancient coffee maker herself, rather than letting him do it. But he also saw nascent traits, qualities that felt new and entirely her own. A wistful look in her eyes as she watched children playing in the park from his window, a vulnerability that surfaced when she spoke of her fragmented memories, a yearning for connection that resonated deeply with his own hidden desires. One evening, he was working on his laptop, trying to write around her, to articulate the sheer impossibility of her existence into the next chapter of his book. He heard her humming softly from the kitchen, a low melodic tune that somehow felt ancient and familiar. He glanced up, and she was there, framed in the doorway, a simple apron tied around her waist, a faint blush on her cheeks from the warmth of the stove. She had taken it upon herself to prepare dinner, a simple pasta dish, but one that filled the apartment with an inviting aroma he hadn't experienced in years. "It is ready," she said, her voice soft, a hint of pride in it. "I found some ingredients." She gestured to the sparse contents of his refrigerator and pantry, which she had somehow transformed. Silas found himself smiling, a genuine, unforced smile that stretched muscles in his face he hadn't realized were so stiff. "Thank you, Elara." He ate slowly, savouring the simple meal, and more importantly, the quiet companionship. The apartment, once a lonely echo chamber of his anxieties, now felt warmer, brighter, infused with a gentle, vital energy. As the days turned into a week, then two, a strange normalcy settled into their lives. He taught her about the modern world, its complexities and its wonders. She, in turn, unknowingly taught him about himself. He started writing again, with a newfound fervour. The words flowed effortlessly now, inspired by the living, breathing muse who now shared his space. He wasn't just writing about Elara, he was writing with her, about the light she brought, about the strange magic of her presence. The story on his screen was no longer stagnant. It was vibrant, alive, thrumming with an energy that mirrored the burgeoning feelings in his own heart. But beneath the surface of this strange, burgeoning domesticity, an undercurrent of profound questions persisted. Who was she truly? Was she merely a reflection of his own imagination? Or did she possess an independent soul? And what would happen if he ever finished the book? Would she simply vanish like a dream upon waking, or would their impossible reality find a way to endure? As he watched her sleep one night, bathed in the silver glow of the moon, her face serene, Silas felt a tremor of both deep affection and a profound, terrifying uncertainty. He knew with a certainty that resonated deep in his bones that his life was irrevocably changed, and that the fragile, beautiful reality they were building was both a miracle and a mystery he was desperate to unravel. Elara's adaptation was astounding, yet Silas noticed subtle shifts in her demeanour, moments of quiet introspection that hinted at a deeper struggle. She absorbed the modern world with an insatiable curiosity, from the whirring of the washing machine to the vast expanse of the internet. But there were times her gaze would drift unfocused, as if searching for something just beyond her grasp. She would occasionally touch a smooth stone or a weathered piece of wood with an almost reverent tenderness, a fleeting expression of profound recognition crossing her features, only to vanish as quickly as it appeared. One rainy afternoon, as Silas worked on a new passage, Elara sat by the window, sketching in a worn notebook he'd given her. Her drawings were intricate, fantastical landscapes, trees with branches that seemed to weep light, creatures with luminous wings, and ancient, crumbling architecture that held an impossible familiarity. "These places," she murmured, her voice soft, "they feel real to me, like echoes." Silas looked up from his screen, a sense of foreboding settling over him. "Echoes of what, Elara?" She turned to him, her moss-green eyes clouded with a wistful longing. "I don't know. Memories, or perhaps a home I never knew, or a life I didn't live." She tapped her temple gently. "There are fragments, like shards of a broken mirror, faces I almost recognize, voices I almost hear, a sense of a purpose, a calling, but the details are lost in mist." The implications were staggering. If she was a character from his book, then these memories were either figments of his own unconscious writing, or they hinted at a depth of being that transcended simple fiction. Was she a vessel for something older, something pre-existing? The fantasy element, which had been a quirky, magical surprise, now began to feel more complex, more profound. Silas, ever the writer, found himself wanting to explore these fragments, to help her piece together her past. He showed her maps, ancient texts he kept for research, images of historical artifacts. Her eyes would light up with recognition at certain symbols, certain landscapes, but the connection remained just out of reach, like a half-remembered dream. "It is like looking through a veil," she explained, her voice tinged with frustration. "I know I have seen this, felt this, but the understanding eludes me." Their search for her past, or the essence of it, brought them closer. Late into the nights, they would talk, surrounded by books and flickering lamplight. Silas found himself opening up, slowly, tentatively, about his own past, the loss of his parents, the struggles with his career, the quiet solitude that had become his only companion. He spoke of his fears, his hopes, the vulnerable parts of his heart he had kept locked away for years. And Elara listened, truly listened, her empathy a warm blanket, her intelligence offering unexpected insights. One night, as a gentle rain pattered against the window panes, they sat on the floor, surrounded by his research books. Silas looked at her, truly saw her, not as his creation, but as the independent, deeply feeling woman she had become. The words he had struggled to write, the emotions he had failed to capture, were now effortlessly conveyed by her presence. A warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years, a profound tenderness that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He reached out, almost unconsciously, and brushed a stray strand of moonlight-spun hair from her cheek. Her breath hitched and her gaze, wide and unwavering, met his. The air crackled with unspoken emotions, a silent language passing between them. He saw the same tenderness in her eyes, the same yearning for connection he had tried to bury within himself. "Elara," he whispered, his voice thick with a sudden, overwhelming emotion. "Even if you are from a story, you are more real to me than anyone I've ever known." A faint blush bloomed on her cheeks, and a small, hesitant smile touched her lips. "And you, Silas," she replied, her voice barely audible. "You feel like home." In that moment, suspended between the reality of his cramped apartment and the magic of her impossible existence, Silas knew He was falling in love, deeply and irrevocably, with the woman who had walked out of his imagination. The mystery of her origins still lingered, a shadowy question mark, but it no longer mattered as much as the undeniable truth of his heart. Their connection was not just about writer and muse, or creator and creation. It was about two souls drawn together across unimaginable divides, finding solace and a burgeoning love in the quiet intimacy of their shared, impossible reality. The burgeoning feelings between Silas and Ilara infused his writing with an almost palpable energy. No longer struggling, he wrote with a fluidity and depth he hadn't known was possible. Ilara's presence was a constant wellspring of inspiration, her laughter a melody, her thoughtful silences a canvas for new narratives. The protagonist of his novel, Ilara, blossomed on the page, reflecting the living, breathing woman beside him, but imbued with an even greater complexity, now that Silas understood the true meaning of love, kindness, and vulnerability. His agent, Evelyn Reed, a woman known for her sharp intellect and even sharper tongue, was the first to notice the seismic shift. Her calls, once infrequent and filled with gentle prodding, became urgent. "Silas, what have you done?" she'd exclaimed over the phone, her voice a mix of awe and suspicion. "This new material, it's breathtaking, it's alive, there's a pulse. A soul in it I've never seen from you. Who is she, Silas? Your muse must be truly extraordinary." Silas, always guarded, deflected Evelyn's questions with vague answers about a renewed focus. He couldn't possibly explain Ilara. The truth was too fantastical, too dangerous to reveal. But her words filled him with a fragile hope. This book, their book, the one that had brought Ilara into existence, might actually be the success he had always dreamed of. One crisp autumn morning, Evelyn called again. Her voice was firm, resolute. "Silas, I've sent the new chapters to a few editors. The buzz is incredible. Universal interest. We have an offer, a significant one, from one of the biggest publishing houses. They want to fast-track this. They want a complete manuscript by the end of the year." The news hung in the air, a double-edged sword. On one hand, validation, success, the potential for a stable future. On the other, a chilling question. What would happen to Ilara when her story was finished? Would the completion of the narrative trigger her return to the pages, or worse, her non-existence? A cold dread seeped into Silas's bones, warring with the exhilarating thrill of professional triumph. He found Ilara in the small living area, sketching one of her intricate, fantastical creatures. Sunlight caught the silvery strands of her hair as she bent over the paper, absorbed in her creation. He watched her for a long moment, the warmth of his love for her expanding in his chest. How could he risk losing this? "Ilara," he began, his voice a little hoarse, "I have some news." He told her about Evelyn's call, the publishing offer, the incredible opportunity. He carefully omitted his fears, trying to maintain a brave face. Her eyes, bright with genuine joy, met his. "Silas, that is wonderful. Your words, your stories, they will touch so many hearts. This is what you were meant to do." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment he allowed himself to bask in the glow of her unselfish happiness for him. "But it means I have to finish the book," he said, the words heavy with unspoken meaning. His gaze searched hers, trying to gauge her reaction, trying to find a clue to the mystery of her existence. Ilara's smile faltered, a shadow passing over her features. She looked down at her sketch, her fingers tracing the outline of a mythical beast. To complete the story, to give it its ending, she murmured, more to herself than to him. The joy in her voice had been replaced by a quiet contemplation, a subtle shift that did not escape Silas. He sensed her profound understanding of the delicate balance between their reality and the narrative he was creating. That evening, as they shared a quiet dinner, the usual warmth of their companionship was subtly tinged with a new tension. Silas found himself watching Ilara, studying her every gesture, every expression, trying to decipher the unwritten lines in her own story. He saw the faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand as she held her teacup, the fleeting shadow in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. He realized then that his fears were also her fears, that she, too, was grappling with the profound implications of her unique existence. The silence stretched between them, comfortable yet now heavy with unspoken questions. The dream of a published book, once his solitary ambition, now felt inextricably linked to the fragile, beautiful reality of Ilara's presence. He had a choice to make, a path to forge, that would dictate not just his future, but hers. And as he looked at her across the small lamplit table, her pure, unselfish kindness shining through even her own apprehension, Silas knew that no amount of literary success could ever compensate for the loss of the woman who had stepped out of his pages and breathed life into his barren world. The looming deadline, coupled with Evelyn's increasingly frequent calls, created a subtle yet undeniable strain in Silas and Ilara's impossible idyll. Silas, torn between the professional triumph he'd always craved and the profound, terrifying uncertainty of Ilara's fate, grew more withdrawn. He spent long hours at his laptop, writing with a desperate urgency, yet his words now carried a quiet tremor of fear. One afternoon, Evelyn called. Silas was in the kitchen, making coffee, while Ilara was in the living area, sketching. He took the call in his study, closing the door, but not quite tightly enough. Evelyn's voice, sharp and clear, filtered through the slight gap. "Silas, I'm telling you, this new Ilara, she's incredible. The editors are raving. They want more backstory on her. They feel her journey, her resilience, her heart. It's the core of the novel. Where did you find this character, Silas? She's a masterpiece of creation." Silas's response was guarded, defensive. "Evelyn, she's a character. She's fictional. I imagined her." He tried to sound convincing, even to himself, but the words felt hollow, a desperate lie. I tapped into something deeper this time." "Deeper indeed," Evelyn chuckled, a knowing tone in her voice. "Well, whatever deeper means, bottle it up. Because this Ilara, she's going to make you a star. Everyone wants a piece of her story. She feels so incredibly real." The words, innocent in Evelyn's mouth, struck Silas like a blow. "She's a character. She's fictional. I imagined her. And everyone wants a piece of her story." He hadn't meant for Ilara to hear, but a chilling silence had fallen in the other room. He ended the call quickly, his heart thumping erratically. When he re-entered the living room, Ilara was standing by the window, her back to him, her shoulders tense. The afternoon sun, usually a comforting presence, seemed to highlight a fragile vulnerability in her stance. "Ilara," he ventured, his voice cautious. She didn't turn. "So I am a masterpiece of creation," she murmured, her voice flat, devoid of the usual warmth, "a character, a story that everyone wants a piece of." Her words were not accusatory, but imbued with a profound sadness. Silas rushed to her side, reaching for her hand. "Ilara, no, it's not like that. Evelyn doesn't understand. She doesn't know the truth." She gently pulled her hand away. Her eyes, usually so vibrant, now seemed clouded, distant. "But is it not the truth, Silas? Am I not a character you imagined, a story you wrote? Are these feelings, these thoughts, this life, merely a narrative you brought forth for others to consume?" Her questions were sharp, intelligent, cutting to the very core of his deepest fears. They echoed his own unspoken doubts. "You are more than that, Elara," he insisted, his voice laced with desperation. "You are real. You are here. You are alive." She finally turned to face him, a faint, melancholic smile on her lips. "Am I? Or am I merely manifesting the traits you gave me? My kindness, my independence, my ability to adapt. Are they not all threads from your loom, Silas? And what happens when the tapestry is complete? Do I simply unravel?" Her gaze pierced through his defences, reflecting a pain he had unknowingly inflicted upon her. The misunderstanding, a chasm of existential doubt, opened wide between them. Silas struggled to find the words to bridge it, to explain the inexplicable, to affirm her unique reality. But how could he, when the very premise of her existence was so fragile, so bound to his own creative act? He saw the hurt in her eyes, the quiet devastation, and a cold dread filled him. He had inadvertently wounded the very soul he had poured so much love into creating. "Elara, please," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I love you. That is real. Everything about us is real." She looked at him then, a profound sadness in her moss-green eyes. "Love," she repeated, the word a delicate, almost foreign sound on her tongue. Can a story truly love its writer, or is it merely programmed to do so? With that haunting question, she turned, walking past him, and disappeared into the privacy of the small spare room he had set up for her. The door clicked shut, a final, definitive sound, leaving Silas alone in the silent living room, surrounded by the echoes of Evelyn's words and the devastating reality of Elara's heartbreak. The warmth that had filled his apartment, once so vibrant and real, seemed to dissipate, leaving behind a chilling void. The click of the door reverberated through Silas's apartment, a stark, definitive sound that sealed not just a room, but a chasm opening between them. The vibrant energy Elara had brought to his life, the light she had cast, seemed to dim, leaving behind a profound emptiness. He stood rooted to the spot, the weight of her words. Can a story truly love its writer? Or is it merely programmed to do so, echoing in his mind, a torturous refrain? He tried to talk to her. He knocked softly on her door, pleading, explaining, confessing his love again and again, but only silence answered him, a silence that was heavier, colder, than any he had ever known. He heard faint movements within the room, the rustle of fabric, the soft scraping of a chair, but no response, no word, no sign that she even heard him. The Elara he had created, the woman of strength and outspokenness, was now using her independence to build an impenetrable wall. Days bled into a melancholic week. Silas couldn't write. The words that had once flowed so freely, inspired by Elara's presence, now felt like lead weights. The laptop screen, once a window to a vibrant new world, was now a blank, mocking canvas. Their story, stagnated, reflecting the frozen state of his own heart. He tried to force himself to conjure Elara's essence on the page, but all he could create was a hollow imitation, devoid of the very soul she embodied. The publishing deadline loomed, Evelyn's calls became more insistent, but Silas could only stare at the unfinished manuscript, a monument to his failure. The apartment, once filled with her gentle humming, the scent of her improvised meals, and the soft rustle of her sketches, became a silent mausoleum of his regret. He felt her absence acutely, a physical ache in his chest. He missed her quiet observations, her intelligent questions, the way she would look at him with a mixture of wonder and understanding. He missed her. He had taken her reality for granted. Lost in the self-absorption of his own ambition and fear, he had called her a character, and in doing so, had wounded her deepest being. One morning, the silence was different, deeper, more profound. Silas woke with a sense of unease, a cold dread twisting in his gut. He went to the spare room, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He knocked, softly at first, then more insistently. No answer. He pushed the door open, a terrible premonition settling over him. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, a testament to her inherent orderliness. The small notebook he'd given her, filled with her fantastical sketches, lay on the bedside table. On top of it, a single dried blossom, picked from the window box she had created from a forgotten planter, and a note. Silas's hands trembled as he picked it up. Her handwriting, elegant and precise, was as he had imagined it. Silas. I cannot stay, not like this, not while I question the very essence of my being, the truth of my heart. You said I was a character, a story. Perhaps that is what I am meant to be, a narrative to be told, to inspire. But a narrative does not yearn for a love it cannot truly possess. A character does not question her own reality. I do not know where I belong, or if I truly belong anywhere beyond the ink and paper from which I may have sprung. But I know I cannot be a source of anguish for you, or a constant reminder of the fragile line between fact and fiction. Perhaps in your story I can find my truth. I hope you finish it, Silas. Give Alara the ending she deserves. Give her a purpose, a life that is entirely her own. And perhaps, one day, I will understand if my heart truly belongs to a story or to the man who dared to write it. Farewell. Ilara. The paper crumpled in his shaking hand, the words blurring through a sudden haze of tears. She was gone. The woman who had stepped out of his pages, breathed life into his world, and irrevocably stolen his heart, had now vanished, leaving behind only the ghost of her presence and the crushing weight of his regret. His literary success, the offers, the fame, it all felt utterly meaningless without her. The very source of his inspiration, the living embodiment of his love, had returned to the ethereal, leaving Silas in a desolate, silent world that now felt colder, emptier than it had ever been before she arrived. His world, which she had so recently illuminated, had crumbled into darkness, leaving him alone with the devastating echo of her departure. The apartment became a tomb. Silas moved through it like a wraith, haunted by Alara's absence. Every corner held a memory, the spot where she had first appeared, the kitchen where she had cooked, the window where she had sketched and yearned. Her faint scent, wild blossoms and mountain air still lingered, a cruel phantom of her presence. The small houseplant she had nurtured, once vibrant, now drooped, mirroring the despair in his own heart. He tried to write, desperately. He opened the manuscript, stared at the blank page where Ilara's story was supposed to continue. But the words were gone, vanished with her. He couldn't create her without her being. His muse was not just an inspiration. She was a living, breathing part of his narrative, his heart, his very reality. Without her, the story was barren, lifeless. He understood now, with a gut-wrenching clarity, that he hadn't merely written a character. He had unwittingly brought a soul into existence, a soul that was now lost and perhaps fading. Evelyn's calls grew frantic. Silas, where are the chapters? The publishers are demanding updates. This is a career-making book. What's happening? He couldn't bring himself to answer. He couldn't explain that the heart of his story had walked out, physically and emotionally. He couldn't explain that if he finished the book now, it would be a hollow shell, an insult to her memory, and a potential death sentence to her existence. He understood the terrifying possibility. If he completed her narrative, would she be confined to it forever? Or, worse, Would she simply cease to be, her purpose fulfilled, her reality dissolved? The thought was unbearable. He remembered her words, "In your story, I can find my truth." Did that mean she needed him to finish it? To give her a definitive existence, even if it meant remaining a character within a world of fiction? Or was it a plea for him to let her go, to allow her to find her own truth, unburdened by his words? The ambiguity tortured him. He spent days poring over his old research, delving into forgotten folklore and ancient myth, searching for any tale, any legend of creation coming to life, of characters transcending their stories. He found obscure references, sentient narratives, and thought forms made flesh, but nothing concrete. Nothing that offered a solution. He felt like he was sifting through sand, desperate for a grain of truth. One night, exhausted and broken, he wandered through the city streets, the cold autumn air biting at his exposed skin. He saw couples laughing, families gathered, and felt an aching loneliness that went beyond mere solitude. He yearned for Ilara, for the warmth of her presence, for the impossible reality they had built. He remembered her wistful gaze at the children in the park, her longing for a life she felt she hadn't lived. He remembered her gentle kindness, her fierce independence, her intelligence. He remembered, He stopped by a small, unassuming bookstore, drawn in by the soft glow of its windows. Inside, among dusty tomes and forgotten novels, he felt a strange pull. His eyes landed on an old leather-bound volume, its title faded, Tales of the Unseen and Unwritten. He opened it, and a strange sense of déjà vu washed over him. He flipped through the pages, his fingers brushing against brittle paper, and then he saw it, an illustration, an intricate etching of ancient, crumbling architecture, strikingly similar to the landscapes Ilara had sketched in her notebook, and next to it, a cryptic passage describing a veil between worlds and echoes of forgotten souls seeking manifestation through resonant hearts. A frantic surge of hope, sharp and electric, jolted through him. He bought the book, his mind racing. Ilara's memories, her unwritten past, her yearning for purpose. It wasn't just a part of his story, it was a part of a larger, forgotten narrative. She wasn't just his creation, she was something more profound, something ancient, simply manifesting through his resonant heart. The thought was both terrifying and incredibly liberating. She wasn't solely dependent on his story, she had a truth beyond it. He rushed back to his apartment, the old book clutched tightly in his hand. He had to find her. He had to tell her. He didn't know where to look, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't finish the book if it meant losing her. He would abandon his career, his dreams of fame, everything, if it meant preserving her. He had to show her that his love was real, not a narrative trick, but a profound, undeniable truth. And as he searched the old book, a small faded map of ancient mythical lands fell from between its pages, a map that showed a specific location, a whispering woods, where the veil between worlds was said to be thinnest, and a desperate, unyielding hope, fierce and bright, ignited in Silas's desolate heart. He would find her. He would. The map, ancient and brittle, led Silas on a desperate journey that defied logic and challenged his dwindling cynicism. It pointed to a remote, untouched forest rumoured to hold vestiges of forgotten magic. The Whispering Woods. It was a place he had only ever read about, a setting he had considered for the mythical realm in his own novel. Now, it felt like a destination, a tangible thread to Ilara. He left behind his apartment, his stalled career, and Evelyn's increasingly enraged phone calls, driven by a singular, unwavering purpose, to find Ilara and affirm her reality, his love, The forest was wild and ancient, its trees reaching towards the sky like gnarled, silent sentinels. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and a profound silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. Deeper he went, guided by instinct and the faded lines on the map, until he stumbled upon a clearing. And there she was. Elara sat by a crystal-clear stream, her feet dipped in the cool water, her moonlight-spun hair braided with wild flowers. She wore the same simple linen dress she had appeared in, now softened by time and forest air. Her moss-green eyes were fixed on the dancing reflections on the water's surface, a profound sorrow etched on her beautiful face. She seemed both utterly real and impossibly ethereal, a creature of the forest and a woman of his dreams. A wave of relief, so potent it almost buckled his knees, washed over Silas. He started towards her, his voice choked with emotion. "Elara!" She looked up, her head snapping towards him, her eyes widening in surprise, then clouding with a complex mix of apprehension and, he hoped, a flicker of joy. She rose slowly, gracefully, her hands clasped in front of her. "Silas," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle murmur of the stream. "How did you—" He closed the distance between them, stopping just a few feet away, his heart hammering against his ribs. "The book," he said, holding up the old volume of Tales of the Unseen and Unwritten. "It led me here. It showed me that you're more than just my words, Elara. You're part of something older, something truly ancient. You manifested through my heart, yes, but you are your own truth. You are real. You were always real." He saw the hope ignite in her eyes, a fragile, brilliant spark, but it was quickly overshadowed by her lingering doubt. "But your story, Silas, my story. What happens when it ends? Will I simply vanish or return to the pages?" "No," he declared, his voice firm, resolute. "I won't finish it. Not if it means losing you. Not if it means confining you. I came here to tell you that I choose you, Elara, over my career, over the book, over everything. My love for you is not a narrative. It's not a programmed emotion. It's real. It's what allowed you to come to me. It's what keeps you here. I am nothing without you. My stories are nothing without you." Her eyes, glistening now with unshed tears, searched his, seeking truth, seeking reassurance. She saw the raw, unfiltered emotion in his gaze, the desperate sincerity. She saw his vulnerability, a sight he had rarely allowed anyone, and in that moment, the wall she had built, the one born of existential doubt and heartbreak, began to crumble. "Silas," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. I felt lost, so lost, like an echo without a source." "You are the source, Elara," he insisted, taking another step closer, his hand reaching out, hesitant. "You are the story, our story, and it's still being written, every single day, with every heartbeat, every breath we share." She didn't pull away this time when his fingers gently enclosed hers. Her touch was warm, solid, utterly real. A tear traced a path down her cheek, but it was a tear of relief, of understanding. I love you too, Silas," she confessed, the words a gentle caress against his soul, more than a character could ever love her writer. "I love you as Elara, the woman who learned to live in your world, and whose heart finally found its home with you. The choice was made, the weight of the publishing deal, the pressure of society, the lure of fame, it all faded into insignificance. All that mattered was the warmth of her hand in his, the profound love that shone in her eyes. In the quiet solitude of the whispering woods, beneath the ancient trees, they found their truth, defying the boundaries of fiction and reality, proving that true love, selfless and unwavering, possessed a power far greater than any story could ever contain. The sun, now high above the whispering woods, dappled through the canopy, painting shifting patterns of light and shadow on Silas and Ilara. They sat by the stream, hands intertwined, their hearts beating a harmonious rhythm. The air, once heavy with questions, now felt light, brimming with possibility. Ilara's existential fears had quieted, replaced by a radiant certainty. She was real, she was loved, and her story, far from ending, was just beginning. Silas had abandoned the manuscript. He hadn't deleted it, he simply stored it away. A relic of a past he had transcended. He knew Evelyn would be furious, that his career would likely tank. But the thought no longer held any power over him. The true masterpiece, the real story, was Ilara and their life together. They returned to his apartment, but it was no longer a lonely, ink-stained attic. It was a home, infused with the warmth of their impossible love. Ilara no longer felt like a guest. She was a co-creator, not of his fiction, but of their shared reality. She continued to sketch, her fantastical landscapes now tinged with the familiar warmth of his world, hinting at the merging of realms. She learned to cook, to garden in his small window box, to navigate the complexities of modern life with an ease that continually fascinated him. Silas, however, couldn't stop writing entirely. It was in his blood, woven into the fabric of his soul. But he no longer wrote about Ilara in the traditional sense. He wrote with her, for her. He started a new project, a series of tales inspired by her unwritten past, by the lore of the Whispering Woods, by the ancient book that had led him to her. These were stories of forgotten magic, of love, defying boundaries, of souls finding their truth across worlds. They were not for publication, not for fame, but for them, for the sheer joy of creation, for the celebration of their unique journey. Ilara would sit beside him, her head resting on his shoulder as he typed, sometimes offering a suggestion, sometimes simply humming a soft tune. Her very presence was a testament to the boundless nature of love, to its power to manifest, to transform, to make the impossible undeniably real. One evening, a year after her impossible arrival, they sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle below. The storm had long since passed, leaving behind a sky dusted with stars. Ilara leaned into him, her hand tracing the lines on his palm. "I still have fragments, Silas," she said softly, her voice peaceful, "of ancient places, of duties, of a time before. But they no longer frighten me. They are a part of me, a part of what made me who I am, and they brought me to you." Silas kissed her hair, inhaling the familiar scent of wild blossoms and clean mountain air. "And they brought you home," he murmured, "to a love that needed to be written, but also lived." He looked at her, at the woman who had stepped out of his imagination and into his life, challenging every notion of reality and expanding his heart beyond measure. She was not a character confined to pages. She was a force, a living, breathing testament to the power of belief, of connection, of genuine affection. Their love was a story unfolding, not written down, but lived every single day. It was a story that transcended the veil between worlds, that proved imagination could birth reality, and that the deepest, truest love was the greatest magic of all. He remembered a line he had once tried to write, a line about the